packed up and left to Hawaii. Is that right?
No. They packed up, well, they went to Hawaii a couple different times.
Okay.
But this was the last trip to Hawaii. The final trip to Hawaii was when we sold the restaurant. So we sold the restaurant, and it was 1974, the end of 1974, when we sold the restaurant and came to Hawaii. The last group came to Hawaii, moved to Hawaii. So we were living in Hawaii, and at this point, when I was called up to Jehovah's quarters, and he assigned me to one of the other sons, who I went with. I mean, I did what I was told. It's crazy.
Do you think he did that with the other night? Do you think he did that with a lot of the other women?
I don't know, because nobody talked about stuff like this. You didn't talk about what had happened in the past. You didn't talk about what your name was before. You didn't talk about what you did before. You didn't talk about where you came from. It was only the now. Gotcha. That's all that it was the present time.
Were you aware from the beginning of what father-yod was doing with his kind of polygamous practices?
Of course.
Okay, so you knew.
But everything was created in a way that, let's put it this way, I was there for him. That's why I came. I came because I wanted to know what he knew. I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to study and get the wisdom that he seemed to have. And that's why I was there. I wasn't there to live in a fun commune. I wasn't there because it was cool. I wasn't there because of some guy I met on Sunset Boulevard who happened to be a member of the Source. I came because one moment our eyes locked, Yahweh's in mine, I knew I was not going to leave him. And I did not leave him.
I see. And he had a great amount of wisdom. I mean, he was very well read. Do you think that that's true?
This episode is brought to you by Airbnb. Millions of people around the world are hosting on Airbnb. They're earning extra income on the side. And for lots of people, it's something they only do when they're on a trip. Think about it. Hosting on Airbnb can help you contribute to a retirement fund every month, or help you put something away towards your kid's college fund. But you might also be worried about your stuff, like that fancy espresso machine, or your new bike. Well, if you want to know how all those other hosts welcome guests into their home without worrying, here's how. Air Cover for Hosts. It gives you $1 million in damage protection anytime you're hosting, plus pet damage protection and income loss protection. And it's free every time you host on Airbnb. When you have Air Cover, the benefits really add up. Learn more and try hosting at airbnb.com/aircover for hosts.
Yes, I think so. So, he had women around him, and he created a situation. First of all, in his life before, Jim Baker was kind of a player. He was kind of a ladies' man. He had affairs. He never could feel like he was monogamous. I had talked to one of his wives, and one of his wives, who was the mother of his children, and she said he kind of created a situation that fit what he wanted. He wanted to have multiple women and have it be okay.
Gotcha.
So he had multiple women, and many of them were very, very young. And he created a situation where he was the heaviest, he was the highest, which was true, and I wanted to be there. Right. I wanted to be as close to him as possible. I wanted to learn what he had to say. I wanted to be around him.
Gotcha.
I wanted to get the wisdom.
Right. I mean, do you think, what kind of wisdom did you learn from father-yod?
Well, when I met him, he was Yahweh.
Yahweh, sorry. Okay.
He had already called himself Yahweh. Okay. I learned a lot of things that I have carried through even into my life now. Things about a lot of things. Things that came out years later, all kinds of things. Law of attraction. We talked about ancient principles. We talked about the Emerald Tablets. We talked about the rules of the universe. We talked about the ancient mystery schools. Lots and lots of information.
Interesting.
And that's the part that I loved. After a while, it got weird. because that wasn't being talked about so much, and he started to get a little more paranoid.
Gotcha. Do you think he was associated or learned any other information from other groups or doctrines?
Yeah,
okay.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, he
like
was
what?
He was with Yogi Bhajan for a while.
Yogi Bhajan.
Yeah, he was with Yogi Bhajan as Jim Baker, and then he kind of spun off and did his own thing, and would do meditation classes and invite the public, and that's how he built. It's very easy for someone who is 20 or 30 years older than someone else. Let's put it this way. The other night, we saw a movie. I don't know if you've seen it. It was called Enlighten Us, The Rise and Fall of James Arthur Ray. You know who James Ray was, right?
No, who was that?
The guy in Arizona where those people died in that sweat lodge?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Uh-huh. No matter what, it's part of human nature to search and want to find out the answers to life and the answers in the universe.
Totally
it's
agree.
human nature to do that.
Yes.
No, even now, after everything that James Ray has done, he still has a whole new group of followers. Even in the movie Holy Hell, I don't know if you've seen that, even after all of that exposure, he still has more followers. Right. And even people want to be led. They want to follow someone who is dynamic, who seems to have answers that they don't have. And human nature is like that. Yeah. And
so
Yehovah seemed to have a lot of answers and a lot of explanation, and I knew I could learn a lot from him, and that's why I was there. And I tolerated incredibly unpleasant experiences to be there.
Gotcha. And how long was your total time with the Source?
Well, it depends what you define as with the Source. Okay. Because Yehovah died in August of 1975.
Gotcha.
And I stuck around for a long time after that. So I'd have to say about 4.5 years.
4.5 years from beginning to end, is that correct?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And can you recount for people, let's talk about like your experience there and how your relationship with the group and father-yod developed up until he passed away. Well,
like I said, when we moved to Hawaii, there were a series of things that happened. And we were moving constantly. We were always moving. We would move into a place, and when you talk about 100 and some people living in some place, the landlord's not going to be too happy about that. Right. So we were always kind of on the move and looking for places to go. But he would lead morning meditation every morning, regardless of what day it was or where we were, and it was always put into a spiritual framework of, we're wandering, like the 40 days and the 40 nights, we're wandering in the desert looking for our home, like the Israelites, or everything was put into a spiritual connotation. So we all just followed along, and I'll tell you something. If he had said, drink Kool-Aid, we would have done it. If he had said, whatever he said, most of us did it. So this thing about, you could do whatever you want, and you could leave whenever you want, and the women could do whatever they wanted to do, and they could go be with whoever they wanted to be with, and they never had to do anything that they didn't feel was right or that they didn't want to do. It's kind of a bunch of crap, because that's not what it was. This was a cult. It took me years to realize that this was a cult. I am, by my profession, I'm a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm an intuitive. I also happen to be an actress. And I was an actress, years ago, even before I went back to school to get my doctorate and everything. But have in the last few years been doing more and more of that, been called in to do more and more of that. But the thing is that it took me a long time to realize that I was in a cult. And there are still many people in the Source who don't realize they were in a cult. You couldn't leave. You know why?
Why?
Because there was the stories of the people who left and went insane. Mm-hmm. The stories of the people who left and committed suicide and were ending up homeless, or people who ended up homeless on the street because they couldn't handle the light, quote unquote. They weren't strong enough spiritually
Did
to
these
handle
stories
the light.
all come from Jim Bakker or Father-yod?
Yes.
Okay.
This is what he would talk about, and this is what would be discussed in morning classes. Oh, so-and-so saw so-and-so on the street, and he's homeless now because he couldn't handle the light. So there's a subtext is, if you leave, you're not heavy enough, spiritually aware enough, or able to handle the light of the consciousness that he was trying to transmit. Okay. So who wants to leave? Who would want to leave and admit that they were an unconscious doofus? Nobody would want to leave and admit that.
Just a quick question, Dr. Elena. What would you think the average age of his followers was?
Well, I was on the upper end. There were, 12 and 13-year-old girls that came in there.
Interesting.
And I think that when I was there, most of them were younger than me.
So he had basically
most of the people on the source were younger than me.
Right. So he had people who were between 18, 23, and he was 52. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple were. My husband was 28, I think, or 29, and but a lot of them were really young, especially the women were young, and so the idea was, the subtext was, being with him was the best. The subtext was, being with him was better than being with one of the lowly sons, even though he would always talk his sons up, and he was very loving toward his sons, but he could also be incredibly stern and cruel. And there's another thing going around where, people have made up T-shirts, and they say the most famous thing he said was, just be kind, and how he always said, just be kind, just be kind. Well, I don't think I ever heard him say just be kind any more than once or twice. I mean, it wasn't like a motto or a family creed, but that has been created to be like a family creed, to perpetuate this glossy fairy tale version of how wonderful life in the source was. I saw him in morning meditation. I never missed a meditation, and I sat as close to him as possible. I wanted to be as close as I could, and there were many mornings when we would have guests come, and he was mean and cruel and made fun of them and laughed at them, and we all laughed too. We just emulated him. We did everything he did. Especially his sons did everything he did. The men in the family. And, I remember, many situations where people would leave because he had been so mean to them. They had come as guests to check him out, and he had said horrible things to them.
So some people, it seems like he sought out younger people to recruit, and then some people he alienated intentionally. Is that correct?
It depended on his mood. I mean, when he had a lot of us living with him, it wasn't so much about recruiting new ones or using the word recruiting, and he didn't really call it recruiting. He said that we were a family, and when there were bickerings or cruelties or misunderstandings, he would say, "Oh, my children, just like a normal family. My children fight with each other sometimes. My children argue. Sometimes there are misunderstandings." But he separated himself from all of that. He was surrounded by women who waited on him and who served him. That was what the role of a woman in the family was, to, quote, serve their God-man, make their food, serve them, make their coffee in the morning, comb their hair, wash their clothes, make their clothes, massage them every night before bed. And there were...
Simple is a card that earns me rewards with no annual fees.
Simple is 1.5% cash back on all of my purchases.
It's a card where I earn cash rewards with no confusing point system and no surprise fees.
I can even get a $300 cash bonus just for spending $3,000 on purchases in my first 3 months.
And that's why I love my cashback Visa credit card from BECU.
Because BECU wants what's best for me. And sometimes the best things are simple.
Contact BECU at 800-233-2328 for current product and rate information.
Those were angels. They were called angels. And then there was a mother angel. So here is Jehovah with multiple women, and he had a, quote, mother angel. And so the idea was his sons wanted to have more women too. So some of them who had more charisma would have a couple of women. They might have one or two women, and one of them, or even three